Hey everybody, I'm Erica Lukes and this is UFO Classified. You can find me at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. We are doing wonderful things on our blog. Jack Brewer is my partner in crime, so make sure you go there, check out what we are doing, and every day Jack is getting more and more information out with regard to FOIA requests and grammar requests. We are doing a lot of digging and it has been fun. We've uncovered a few things and we're going to keep going, so check it out. And tonight is going to be a great show. I want to give a shout out to everybody that I see in chat. Thank you all for being here and creating a global community of people who really want to make sure that we are vetting our sources, that we're putting out reliable information, especially in a time so fraught with misinformation and disinformation. That is our goal, to make sure that we're getting good quality stuff out. And tonight is going to be a barn burner, I have no doubt. James Carrion is back tonight with us. He's a writer, researcher, a former international director of the Mutual UFO Network. His primary research focus involves the likelihood flying saucer stories were planted in 1947, I pretty much agree, in newspaper articles as part of a US-led deception operation for the purpose of breaking the Soviet diplomatic code. So he has been on my show over the years several times. He is also a former intelligence analyst, and he earned his Bachelor of Arts in Russian language and a Master's of Arts in International Affairs from Florida State University. And you can check him out. We've got links to his information and blogs so you can learn about him. And James, no doubt, if you are familiar with the UFO world, he has been a very controversial figure for many, many years. And I think that's what attracts me to him. And I know Jack feels the same way. He was very controversial when he left MUFON and also was pretty instrumental in outing some of the things that were taking place. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But James, welcome to the show. Nice to see you. Jack, always good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So James, what have you been up to?
Oh, what have I been up to? Mostly work, family, traveling. Not a lot of UFO stuff, though.
Isn't that nice, though?
Yeah, it is. It's nice to be away from the circus, which it really is, and continues to be a circus. I'm just so amazed at how much this subject is in the news and how far it's gone all the way up to the halls of Congress. And the public is just enthralled with all of the things they're seeing in congressional testimony and all of these whistleblowers coming forward. And I'm enthralled too. I'm excited too. Hoping that this will be the threshold of disclosure. But then, you see all these congressional hearings and it goes over into classified briefings and the public sees nothing. We see no real evidence, no real proof of what these whistleblowers are saying, what they're alleging. And it just seems like we're in this, I hate to use the term, but it was the title of my recent blog article. It was a big circle jerk where the same old folks we've seen for years, basically pushing a narrative are the ones that are essentially propping each other up. And they push this narrative that there is, all these things we've heard about in UFO history and lore that all of a sudden has, we have government officials, we have intelligence officials coming forward and basically corroborating some of these myths that we know as myths because we've investigated them. We know there's no substance to them. The problem is that when the public sees an authority figure and that authority figure makes an assertion, they're not likely to try to, look and see if there's any real substance behind it. They're just believing the words of this individual, this authority. And the media does the same thing. You're going to be hard pressed to find a journalist that does real good journalism around this subject. No one's digging hard. No one's asking the hard questions. And so what we have is this regurgitation of UFO lore that goes from the normal folks that we know in the UFO field forever to the usual suspects that have one foot in the intelligence community and one foot in ufology. And now in the halls of Congress, all of this regurgitation of UFO information but no real evidence, no proof. And we're just sitting here, kind of like the folks are with the Epstein files. Why are you withholding information? Just let it all out. There's no reason for you to hide anything anymore, assuming that there's not some other motive behind that.
And so what do you, because I look at this and I see, as you mentioned, the usual cast of characters, the people like Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff and, Bigelow lurking back there, who have been prominent in the subject for decades. Since the 70s with Puthoff and then Davis a little bit later and Bigelow. But, they've gathered around promoting the same false stories, and to me, it is amazing to see how we've watched this little community of ours kind of fester in the corner, not getting a lot of attention, being dismissed. And now it would appear to me that what's taking place is very much aligned with what is taking place politically, and also it's being used as a way to further erode trust in government, which right now I might say would be a good time to be a little suspicious of things. But it's the people that are really pushing this forward have a definite agenda and are being fed information that, like you say, isn't accurate. So what do you feel about that, and how does that parallel perhaps like the QAnon conspiracy theories?
I'm not sure if it's so much parallel to QAnon, because QAnon was just made up, basically made out of thin air, right? Basically one of these internet memes that pop up, and all of a sudden it has a following. So I'm not sure it actually parallels with QAnon. I actually think of this as more of a religion, right, which is based purely on belief. And it used to be that there was this UFO community of people that believed, and they didn't have really hard evidence, but they had this belief. Now, what's happening is this belief has gone mainstream, right? It's gone mainstream. So now you have folks in Congress, asking questions of these whistleblowers, or folks like George Knapp and Lou Elizondo, but they're the same old characters. And really, if the public doesn't know this, though. The public does not know that if you were to create a murder board of ufology, starting with Congress at the top in these congressional hearings, you're going to start seeing that this all leads back to things like Skinwalker Ranch and all of these usual suspects that you and I have been dealing with and confronting for a number of years. And we know Skinwalker itself, I don't care about the show, because I think the show is absolute garbage, because bottom line is that there's no proof, there's nothing to that mythology. Someone created that mythology out of thin air. And from that, you just trace it all the way up to Lou Elizondo and to ATEB and to the New York Times story in 2017, to now all of these hearings before Congress. Make the murder board, you're going to see it all goes back to a common source. And that's why I say that it's this circle jerk of a voice that's propping up another voice, but they're all within the same community. They're all in the same narrative. They're simply basically propping each other up and making each other's assumption to be true, when there's no real truth to it. There's no hard proof to it.
Interesting. And so I have been digging into the Epstein files because I find it obviously very troubling and quite timely to see the people that are involved in this horrific cover up, but also to see that he was involved with some of the same people, Peter Thiel, people like that, who were definitely, they had a vested interest in promoting conspiracy theories. And we have heard rumors over the years that Peter Thiel is perhaps involved in some of these UFO organizations, or one in particular, and is involved in mining data. And so to me, and then also was one of the people that was involved in the QAnon, like starting the QAnon conspiracy, which I find, nothing surprises me at this point because it's also strange. So this will be fascinating to see what comes of this. But do do you think that people can learn lessons from the UFO community, what we've seen historically for the past 70, 80 years, the way people believe, that people become indoctrinated into a cult, just like QAnon, or just like specific things that are taking place, with politics in the country? What lessons can we learn from what's taken place in the UFO community?
Yeah. So, well, first off, conspiracy is dangerous. It's dangerous for democracies. It polarizes the citizenry, and we've known this in the UFO community, right? Because there's always been the debunkers and the believers, polar opposites, with the skeptics in the middle, trying to make sense of this belief without proof. But that's really what conspiracy is, right? You believe there's some cabal out there that's hiding this secret and keeping it from the public. And that's ufology is founded on that, right? The cosmic Watergate, what Stanton Friedman was often fond of saying, right? That there's this deep state that's out there and that's hiding this UFO secret from the public. And now we see that also in these congressional hearings, right? Or what comes out of these congressional hearings, where we have the disclosure crowd, like Lou Elizondo and David Grush, and all the folks that sat there before Congress and took an oath to tell the truth. Maybe they believe exactly what they were saying. Maybe they were told something and they're just regurgitating it. But the bottom line being that, that's the disclosure crowd. And they're basically saying, yes, we know there's this deep state. There's this legacy program that's out there. It's being kept from us. Where's the proof of that? There is no proof of that. Again, they're just words. People are just saying words. And so what we're seeing is like these polar opposites playing out between the disclosure crowd and now the folks that are trying to hide the secrets, the so-called deep state and the legacy program. And, we're just basically participants and observers of this without being able to really make any sense of it, and also not to be able to see them corroborate what they're saying, right? We haven't, obviously, no one from the legacy program is going before Congress and saying, yes, we have a legacy program. We're only hearing the disclosure crowd. And the disclosure crowd, they've been very loud. And they made it all the way to Congress, and they're in the news, and the media is eating it up, and the public is eating it up. But we're no closer to the truth than we ever have been. We're farther away from the truth than we've ever been.
Absolutely. I agree. And Jack, I thanks. And I know that you've got questions too, but this is really amazing and an important show to me to get information out. But it is sad that we are moving further away from the truth. And in my opinion, we should have research that has nothing to do with pushing this forward in a political way. And this is being used as a political, kind of a weapon. The disclosure crowd is especially, guilty of that. It's fascinating to me to see some of the same stories that were attempted to be passed on to, not only myself, but to other people. And other people have kind of run with that. I did for a while until I learned a lot more. But it is interesting to see these people that are in Congress promoting the same stories without that information, without factual information, as you point out.
And where is the hardcore journalism here?
Right.
There's no journalist out there saying, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me really dig into it. Let's talk to these sources. Let's find out what their proof is. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you remember back to Trump's first term when he said, I'm divesting myself of my finances. And he had on the desk in front of him this pile of binders that looked official, like it had something to do with his finances. And not one reporter even picked up to see what those papers were about. They just sat there and they took in the information, they wrote it down and they reported it. But they never even decided to look at the evidence that was right in front of them. And we're seeing the same thing now with this UFO disclosure or all of this congressional testimony. Where do you see any journalists out there really digging into the story? They're not. It's very superficial. And the media is treating this very superficially. And
Right.
It's a topic that requires, hard-nosed, hardcore journalism, people asking hard questions.
Absolutely. Jack, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I have lots of them on all this. Erica, you asked about the similarities and what we might correlate between the different types of conspiracy communities. And it reminded me, I'm going to go old school on everybody here, that back in the day, there was a knowledgeable researcher named George Hansen, and he wrote just an observation. He wrote that it was just absolutely amazing the number of former military intelligence officials that interact regularly in the UFO community and online. And that was at a time when we used to go to what were known as message boards. And there was one called Open Minds Forum, and MUFON had a message board, and Above Top Secret was one where a lot of intelligence personnel operated. And I recall James was among the first that I heard, and I'll paraphrase here, saying that if the UFO culture wasn't being used as a laboratory, well, then the powers that be were missing a real good chance. And I mean, there's really not a reasonable explanation for why so many intelligence officials get involved. I know some people say, well, they're interested. They want to know what's going on. And for a number of reasons, I just don't buy that. I mean, if you're given security clearance and you're so much as a clerk at the FBI, you have to get proper clearance just for civic groups and social circumstances. And it, insults my intelligence that so many intelligence officers allegedly moonlight on boards of UFO organizations and things like that. Take that whatever direction go with it either.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, I frequented those boards. I actually started up the MUFON board when it was a thing back then. And I could tell that there were folks on there that were hiding behind anonymity, that were posting things that were inflammatory. I mean, it was basically, the beginning of trolling back on the internet, right? Where they figure that information is power. And so, you can use words to, get advantage of a subject and grab the narrative and take it and run with it. And I could see the dangers back then. And we see it playing out in society today, right? Where we're really in an information war. That's what really is going on right now, right? The media, they're competing with each other to get out narratives. It's, it's either politically based or it's power based. Bottom line being that folks have figured out way back then, especially the intelligence community, I believe, how to use information to your advantage. I mean, that's what it is, right? Grabbing the narrative, taking hold of the narrative. And they probably trained their operatives on all those UFO boards, right? What a great training ground. What a great training ground the UFO community is, right? If you want to train somebody in the art of disinformation or misinformation, throw them out there at a UFO conference, right? Get them involved in the UFO lecture series. You can see how these folks, because they're so caught up in this cult mentality and this conspiracy, they're very easily manipulated, right? As long as you're talking their language.
Absolutely. And that's been, I mean, back in the day when I first got involved in this, I took people at their word a lot more than I do now. I've learned a lot of very, very hard lessons, and it has been interesting for me. And I'm just noticing somebody in chat saying that Arrow would love you, but I will just say that, if anybody could present evidence to me that I felt was tangible, if there was evidence like that, we wouldn't be seeing people like Jeremy Corbell releasing blurry videos. This would be something that I mean, it would not be presented the way it is if there was something credible in my information, to me. And so it is, it's fascinating, and preying on gullible people and using this. I mean, like you said, it's a perfect test ground for people in the intelligence community. And I think that, like some of the good old boys, some of the historians in this subject, it's very funny because Jack and I have these discussions. They're very black and white. they're either looking at one case, this is a UFO, or they're looking at it, that, I mean, there's never any mention of the intelligence community or people that have a vested interest in grifting. It's either yes or no, and nobody understands the fine lines that are being drawn with this and the way it's being used. And I don't understand that. I mean, James, what do you think, with some of the old guard? What do you think that are they just so vested in making sure that they're proving UFOs are real that they don't want to look at the way this subject is used?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, I call them not perpetrators, but perpetuators, because they have a vested interest in just perpetuating the subject. I don't even really think they want to get at the truth. I think for them, a lot of folks that are making the rounds of the talk circuit, the UFO talk circuit, for them, this is, a little extra income, maybe it's an ego stroke, but most of them are not in it for truth seeking, right? They're in it for whatever purpose they have for continuing to perpetrate, right? Perpetuate, I should say, not perpetrate, perpetuate. But, in terms of, whether or not they have an interest in, looking at the intelligence side of this, I don't think they do, because I don't think they critically can examine it. They don't have the background in intelligence. They don't understand how intelligence operatives work. They don't have a good grounding basis in how to spot disinformation and misinformation, and knowing when you're being manipulated, and knowing when you're being taken for a ride. They simply don't. I don't think they have that capacity. So this old guard, they're, like I said, they're under the circus tent of ufology, which in itself is a religion, and for them it's all about belief. Critical thinking doesn't come into it. And it's one of the big battles I had to fight when I was at MUFON, because I thought, oh yeah, as the head of this organization, I'm going to turn things around. I'm going to make folks stop with the belief and more with the hardcore investigative tactics. That only went so far, because then all of a sudden from within, I felt all of these folks were like, hey, we really do believe this, and we don't like, what you're doing here, because you're telling us we have to examine people's humans as red flags when red flags pop up, and we believe these people. We can't just go in there and be hard-nosed investigators. And my thought was, no, you have to be a hard-nosed investigator, right? When you go investigate a UFO case, you have to look at the human aspect of it. You have to look for those red flags that are popping up that will tell you maybe something's not right. Maybe this narrative is not correct. Maybe they're embellishing. Maybe they're making something up. And I'm not saying that UFO witnesses are all doing that. A lot of them are just reporting what they saw, and maybe they misinterpreted what they saw. But but other folks are in there. A lot of these folks, like, I mean, you probably know or heard of them, Stan Romanek.
Oh yeah.
This who's the other guy who's making the rounds of all the talk circuits now, who wrote UFO of God, I think is the name of the book.
Go ahead. Erica knows that one. She was going to.
No, I'm trying to remember. I know Jeff, you're listening, so Jeff will know.
Right.
I should know, because we did a TV show on him.
Yeah.
Oh, not Chris Bledsoe.
Chris Bledsoe. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris Bledsoe.
I can understand knowing the book off the top of your head. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris Bledsoe. Yeah. His start was actually when we went to investigate his alleged sightings for a show we did for the Discovery Channel in 2008. That's where that whole thing started. And since then, he's become this UFO celebrity. And, he's written all these books, and he's making all these claims, and he's this big UFO guru. I'm sorry, a lot of red flags were popping up back then when we first started investigating him. And I think those red flags, folks just let them go by now, right? Nobody's looking hardcore at his what he's written about, or what he's asserting, or what he claims his experiences are. And even his son has gone off on the deep end of that. In fact, it's funny because his son, basically put out a tweet saying that, oh yeah, I was told by a CIA agent that James Carrion is a CIA agent. Putting this information, this is Chris Bledsoe's son, putting this out on the internet. And so my response to that was, Really? Seriously? CIA agents are not in the business of outing other CIA agents, right? That makes no sense.
Right.
But somebody who's not who doesn't have a background in intelligence will not even think of that. They're just saying, "Oh yeah, the CIA agent told me that guy's a CIA agent." Come on, it doesn't make any sense. Anybody in the intelligence community would look at that and raise their eyebrows and go, "That makes zero sense."
And so let me ask you, because I think a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I mean, I didn't have an idea of how intelligence, agencies functioned or how they used psychological warfare and disinformation and misinformation. And so what are some of the ways that people can be looking at information that's being put forward to identify what is actually factual and what isn't? And then also to add on that, how can people know if there's somebody coming forward claiming they have all these credentials and worked for the FBI or for the CIA? How can we make sure that that person is actually who he says he is and has the credentials that he does?
It's very difficult if they claim that they're a CIA agent, because oftentimes the CIA will not acknowledge, right, that this person used to work for the CIA. In fact, CIA personnel have difficulty when they get out of the CIA and they want to get a job because they have all of these basically these gaps in their resume where they can't even describe what the type of work that they did. So yeah, it's going to be very difficult when somebody says, "I used to work for the CIA." Well, good luck, trying to some folks are out there, that are out there and they're known to have worked for the CIA. But other people that pop out there, they can make claims and there would be no way for you to corroborate it or to even, figure that out. FBI probably is a little easier, and maybe the FBI would acknowledge former agents, but I don't think the CIA would.
And would somebody that was really in the CIA come out and tell the whole world that, hey, I was, in the CIA involved with this poison, pen or the umbrella, the popping umbrella that poisoned somebody? Would people really, really do that were intelligence officers?
Only if they're trying to use that background to further maybe their career, right? To start up a podcast, right? So that they can show that they have some level of credentials. But those are few and far between. I mean, other folks are the governor of Virginia is a former CIA officer, right? Obviously, she said, I was with the CIA. No one's going to say you weren't. I mean, she's an official in the government. There are senators who were former CIA officers. But it's the folks that pop up in the UFO field that claim these credentials that you really have to be suspect.
And so how do you feel like, say, about like Jim Semivan and some of those people that popped up and the same kind of people that are surrounding Chris Bledsoe and that have historically that have promoted his stories? Like what do you think? Is there something shady about their backgrounds, and how could somebody look at that background and decide whether they're telling the truth or not?
It's I mean, Jack probably will agree with me here. There have been folks that have been high-level officials in intelligence who have popped into the UFO field, and a lot of folks have raised an eyebrow about it, but a lot of times nobody questioned why they did it. The first director of the CIA was involved, in the UFO field with NICAP, right? Hillenkotter. There were other former CIA officials and high-level intelligence officers that were in UFO circles back in the 50s. But now that somebody like Semivan who pops in and associates himself with somebody like Chris Bledsoe, I'm just trying to understand the motive. Why would he even do that, right? It seems, first, it's a fringe subject. So if you're former CIA, why are you involving yourself in this fringe subject? I mean, something does not seem to be right there.
Okay, thank you for answering that. I think it's so important to try to figure all of these things out, especially for people that don't have that understanding of things. And like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, they just question, or they because somebody's on TV or because somebody claims to have a background, they're going to take it hook, line, and sinker, especially after the New York Times 2017 article that you mentioned. It's like you just swallow that because it was in the New York Times, and then you don't ask any more questions. So that's definitely unfortunate.
Right. And you also have to ask yourself the question, why does your skepticism, Erica, and your skepticism, Jack, and my skepticism never go mainstream, right? We're not on the front page of CNN talking about our skepticism. It's always the belief stories, right? The uncorroborated stories, the ones that get glossed over, and no one's doing, hardcore journalism on to uncover, the truth behind it. So you have to think that there's some influence going on in the media that plays out, maybe from the intelligence community. Everybody knows that the intelligence community has a long history of relationships with journalists.
Right.
So they're pushing narratives out through the media. This is probably one that they're pushing, and it's not the skepticism, it's on the disclosure side. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is this mainstream now? I mean, there has to be a rationale behind it. I don't know what that rationale is, but there's got to be something there. Just have to ask the hard questions.
There are certainly certain reporters that handle this topic with softball questions, and then there are media outlets too that seem to I mean, just from a layperson's observations, just looks like they're returning favors for access or something. I don't know, but that certainly look like they're on the list of where to get stories published. Yeah. And along the lines of red flags with specific self-described former CIA officers, a red flag for me is when they become defensive, that I'd ask, can they show me anything? Is there anyone that vouches for this? Someone has the CIA acknowledged? And Jim Semivan is on that list of people that he's tried to play the I'm offended card with me when I've wanted to verify his employment, as if it's an insult. And see, that's a red flag for me, like when Luis Elizondo and these different people act as if their integrity is insulted, that you would question their story and credentials, because the truth stands up to scrutiny. Like, I think that's one of the things James is getting at here. And if I came to either of you, or I went on someone's podcast and wanted to tell them what I had learned from my work and what documents I have seen in the custody of the FBI and the National Archives, I would welcome their questions, and I'd be completely prepared to show them the documents and to explain to them how I learned these things. And that's what reasonable people do when they're asked to verify a story, or they don't bring the story, or they at least empathize and say, I can understand why you'd ask if a CIA guy in the UFO field was really a CIA guy. That's a reasonable question, but it's kind of tough to verify it, would be the rational answer. And when it's not, I think that's a red flag.
And they don't have to be CIA. You can add Brandon Fugel to that list, right? Of somebody who's super defensive when you try to ask even the simplest of questions, right? So, when I had a confrontation with him online about Skinwalker Ranch and whether or not there were any paranormal activities going on prior to Bigelow taking over the property, you should see the level of defensiveness. He basically called me a liar. He called everybody that I quoted a liar, and he just went off on the deep end. You're right. Defensive people have no reason to hold back. I mean, they have reason to hold back the truth, and those that are actually promulgating the truth should be open to any question you're asking them, right? They have nothing to hide if they have nothing to hide.
You would think so. I mean, he definitely is. I can't even think of the names that he's called me, over the years and things, and Stephen Greenstreet and people like that. But it is, if if you are sure of what you're putting forward, then you are okay with letting scientists come onto your property and corroborate what you're saying. And that has not been the case. And he's made quite an industry out of the Skinwalker Ranch, as did Bigelow. And I'm still trying to figure out what, is it just a money-making thing? And James, what do you think now, looking back, since we've had some times since we last spoke? I mean, what do you think Bigelow's intention was there? And what do you think that Brandon is doing? And how do they differ?
Well, I think for Bigelow, it had nothing to do with money. I think it had everything to do with influence in the government.
Okay.
And letting intelligence operatives play around on his property for whatever favors he got in return. Whether that's allowing his space venture to go forward or to win some kind of contract. Bigelow, again, this is where when we talk about information and control of information. You can look at NIDS that operated, before ATIP under Bigelow's organization. Where's all the data they collected? Where's all the data that they supposedly, gathered on the ranch? All the scientific data never released. The same thing with Brandon Fugel, right? There's this TV show filming every day. They never release their data. They don't get it peer reviewed. It's just they're putting on this spectacle, this show. That's on the Fugel side. But on the Bigelow side, I really think it's something to do with inside influence, nothing to do with making money directly off the ranch.
Okay, interesting. And it would be fascinating to see how many contracts he's getting these days. Now that, especially
Right.
because he was a huge donor to the current president. So
Right.
that would be interesting. But again, like, why have a top secret place and seed information about this? And, it's the most highly guarded secret, then put information forward with the address. Like, does that even make sense? They'd actually be studying on the property, or was it just to see the way information flows and how they can promote an absurd story and how people will follow that?
What I think is, can we create a myth out of thin air, and how far can we push it? Well, guess what? They pushed it all the way to the halls of Congress.
Right.
That's how far it went.
Do you think that, with Bigelow buying the MUFON database, do you think that part of the reason that he did that was to gather that information, to see what makes people believe in conspiracy theories, to mine information and see how the spread of that information can affect society? I mean, what are the motivations that you think now were behind him buying the MUFON database?
I'm sure it had a lot to do with information warfare and psychological manipulation, and there could be a number of reasons. But it also could have simply been, hey, I wonder if anybody ever reported one of our top secret aircraft as a UFO.
Okay.
Are there photos in the MUFON database that reflect that? Is there data there that's really of national security concern? And it's not the first time. I mean, there was actually a case when I was still a MUFON director, where somebody did take a photo of what they said was a UFO, but it ended up being a top secret craft that was re-entering from orbit. So yeah, it could be just for that reason. Or it could be that they want to investigate who's making these reports. If you remember back to the Robertson panel in '53, their concern was not that UFOs were a danger. They were worried about our enemies using UFO reporting to overwhelm channels of information. And so maybe they're looking to see if there's some foreign interest that would be reflected in the MUFON data.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's probably a combination of all of those things.
Sure.
Actually, it's definitely not looking for extraterrestrial craft, but that's my own opinion.
Yeah.
So, Jack, what are you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, but don't you find interesting that this recent congressional testimony has regurgitated all of the major myths from ufology, from crash retrievals to reverse engineering? I think really the only thing they didn't touch upon were abductions, underwater submersible objects. Yeah, truly, I didn't hear anybody mention anything about abductions, but everything else that has shown up in UFO history in terms of mythology is part of the narrative now. I find that extremely interesting.
I do too.
James, I often reference your work. Erica knows that. Folks that watch me talk with Erica online know that I'll often reference things that I've learned from watching the way you conduct and report your research. And let's talk a little about some of your past work, like the material you put forward in Anachronism. One of the things that stood out in that to me, that it just was one of those things like there's just nothing new under the sun type of feelings, is when I was reading how you documented how British intelligence was very competent at influencing public opinion, and that they were targeting the American public to some extent to influence the American public's opinions on World War II and wanting to help Britain. And one of the things you wrote about was a man named William Stevenson, if I recall correctly. He was a talented intelligence officer. And one of the things he would do is make sure that rumors couldn't be traced to their sources. And he would position people at different places in the country, give leads to newspapers, get stories out. And that would make it seem very accurate as well. If you're like, well, wow, the AP's got it and the New York Times has it. And hey, look, the Miami Herald's running a story on this too. And could you talk some about the things you learned? And this also plays into what Erica says about, if we don't know this is pretty common tradecraft in the intelligence community, we're really at a disadvantage. And like, I understand people come in just wanting to learn about UFOs, but we really need to be able to understand what we might be looking at in some of these situations too. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the British, they originated the entire information circle jerk. They really did. I mean, the person you mentioned, William Stevenson, he was a Canadian. He was basically the representative of MI6 in the US before the US entered the war. And he started up an organization that was at Rockefeller Center in New York called British Security Coordination, that basically had 1,000 folks on operatives on US soil. And their sole purpose was to influence the US to enter the war, and also to counter anything that the Nazis were trying to do. Because remember, the Germans were here too, trying to get the US to be in their favor, right? We saw what, the organization that held a rally at Madison Square Gardens, right, were basically American Nazis. So British Security Coordination was the answer to that. And they played dirty. They really did. I mean, you've heard, that everything's fair in love and war. They embodied that. So they would send their operatives down to the dockyards in New York and beat up German sailors, right, who were trying, or they would. One of the big things he did was he created this fake map of South America to make it look like the Germans were carving up the countries of South America to be part of the Reich, and then they leaked it. And when the government officials from the South American country saw that, they were like, whoa, we better not align ourselves with the Germans. We better align ourselves with the Allied powers. I mean, this is the kind of information warfare that they did. And what you're alluding to in terms of being able to get a story out and get it to basically go viral, that's what they did. They got stories to go viral around the world. Back in a time where there was no internet, right? There was no YouTube, there was no social media. So everything had to do with the printed newspapers or radio shows. So they bought radio shows, they bought newspapers, and what they would do is they would actually start overseas. They would plant the story in an overseas newspaper. Then they would get one of their affiliated newspapers in the US that they owned to report on it as though, oh, we got the source from abroad that's reporting this, so we're just going to re-report it. And then from there, it went to the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. They were experts at this. They knew how to make information go viral. They knew how to plant these stories and how to get them going. And we can see basically the same thing today, right? I should say, the intelligence community has learned from this. They learned all the lessons from their British counterparts. They're experts at manipulating the media, manipulating the news.
Fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. And this is not stuff I'm making up. There are books written on this. There's a whole book written that has the blueprint for how the British did this. You can pick it up. I think it's called Room 502, because that was the office that they had at Rockefeller Center. 402, 502, I forget the name of the book. But it gives the entire blueprint for how the British did that. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is purely deception, right? I think the greatest deception operations in history came out of World War II. And, the British were experts at it. The Americans quickly learned how to basically perform deception on a grand scale, like they did when they were trying to create cover for troops going into Normandy on D-Day. And you have to think that after World War II, did our intelligence operatives just stop using deception? Absolutely not. They continue to use deception. The problem is none of it's documented in a way that historians can report on it. You can go to the National Archives and you can find all of the World War II deception operations in those archives, declassified. Try and find one post-World War II deception operation that has ever been in the public domain. And this is what intelligence historians, they bemoan and they get very upset about, because they're like, how can we report on intelligence history if we can never get access to declassified documents that document that history? And deception is one of the biggest ones that never gets declassified.
And so let me ask you, when you're looking at the deception from, the British intelligence agency or MI6, 5, it's okay, and also the Russian disinformation, what are the differences between the two different countries and the way that they operate in the deception realm?
Actually, they very much operate in the same fashion.
Okay.
But the difference was back in the early, like in the 40s, the Americans claimed that they would never use the media as a deception conduit, while the Russians were like, yeah, we use it all the time, right? That's what we do. We plant stories, we give information because we control it. We control the entire media. But the Americans always said, no, that's too far. That's not what a democracy does. Yet they did it anyway. Right. So we know they did. Right. They're planning stories. They're manipulating journalists. They have journalists on payroll. I mean, yeah, the media has been a big part of how deception operations. It's a big conduit for deception. So there is a lot of similarity there. But I think that probably the Americans and the British are much better at strategic deception than the Russians are. And when I say strategic, we're talking about at the level of a country, one country deceiving another country. So that's why if you read my book, The Roswell Deception, I really do think that all of those events from the summer of 1947, from Kenneth Arnold to Roswell to the Maury Island incident, I think all of those were part of some strategic deception at a very high level. One country against another. The U.S. Basically trying to influence the Russians.
And that is so fascinating to me. Sorry, Jack. I know you've got a question. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Erica.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's talk a little about that. There are a series of complex situations that make up James's overall hypothesis. One of those circumstances is a fascinating chain of events involving something called Project SEAL. Would you summarize that for us, please, James, and how it's relevant in media deception?
Sure, absolutely. So essentially 2 weeks prior to Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting that kicked off the entire UFO craze back in 1947, 2 weeks prior to that, there was a viral news story that went worldwide that basically said, hey, the Americans have this new wonder weapon that's bigger than the atomic bomb. It's something greater than the atomic bomb. We don't know what it is, but it's something that we're told is bigger than the atomic bomb. So obviously, the media ate that up. It went all across the world, and folks started to speculate, what could this possibly be? What kind of weapon could it be? Well, in this story, they were actually getting quotes from the scientists who supposedly worked on the project. One was an American, one was a New Zealander. And because the New Zealander was an expert in aerodynamics, the media speculated that it was an airborne weapon. So think about it, an airborne weapon bigger than the atomic bomb. 2 weeks later, we have UFOs hitting the news. So you can already see the seeds of the deception forming there that had to do with making the Russians think we had some wonder weapon that all of a sudden people were seeing all over the United States in the summer of 1947. So I decided to start digging into this story because they named the scientists from this project. One was Dr. What was his name? Dr. James, sorry, I can't remember his name now. I'll have to think about it. But basically, he was an oceanographer. He was working for the Scripps Institute in San Diego after the war. During the war, he was a scientist that was assigned to top secret projects. So he did have a background in top secret projects. So I decided to go look into his background. So I flew to the Scripps Institute in 2009, got access to his papers that he donated to the library there when he died, because I wanted to find out what the secret weapon was. Well, then I found what it was, and I found the actual declassified report. And what he was working on, in conjunction with the other scientists who was also named in these viral news stories, was a project called Project SEAL. Project SEAL was a real top secret project, and it was worked on by this American and this New Zealander in New Zealand. And what they were doing is they were trying to create an artificial tsunami by blowing up explosives underwater. Because the thought was, we were in the war with the Japanese, and we were getting our asses kicked on all of these islands across the Pacific. So the thought was, let's create a wonder weapon where we can basically put explosives underwater, where these Japanese, in this island where the Japanese are at. We'll create a tsunami, we'll wipe out everybody on the beach, then we'll go in with the Marines, right? So it was supposed to be a weapon that was supposed to help our forces in the Pacific. So they were experimenting with this in 1945, but it was killed off in 1945. If you read the declassified report, it's there in plain black and white. This project was ended in 1945. Yet in 1947, right, 2 weeks before Kenneth Arnold, all of a sudden, this project became news as it was a wonder weapon that the Americans were still working on, was still top secret. It was bigger than the atomic bomb. And by the way, these are the scientists who worked on it. So they were going along with the story, knowing full well that the project they worked on was dead 2 years prior. So what does that tell you, right? What does that mean, right? There is deception in black and white, right? We can see it in the historical record. Has any historian ever written about it? No. Has any newspaper ever picked this up? No. This is what I mean by there's evidence there that gets ignored. I don't know for what reason. But that's where I started to see the seeds of deception, and I was able to then correlate that with the Kenneth Arnold sightings and start digging into the National Archives for other information. And everything I've written in my book, The Roswell Deception, is fully documented. You can see all the sources for all the documents I recovered from the National Archives or from the Scripps Institute or from all the other archives that I went to substantiate my theory. But I think, when we talk about deception, why do countries perpetrate deception? Well, primarily, deception operations are meant to influence your enemy, either to perform an action or to not act, right? And so I think there was actually, for the 1947 stories, I think it was twofold. I think they both wanted the Russians not to act by overrunning Eastern Europe, because we basically were the only ones that had the atomic bomb at the time, plus something bigger than the atomic bomb that was our wonder weapon. So we were trying to influence them not to go to war in Europe. But I also think it had a separate motive, which had something to do with breaking the Soviet diplomatic code. And I'm not going to go into that because it's way too complicated. But if you go online and you Google for the International Journal of Counterintelligence, I wrote an article about my theory about how flying saucer stories were used to break the diplomatic code. And I show it in plain black and white how it could have worked, and why the circumstances were right back then for that to happen. It was peer reviewed. This is a peer reviewed article. This is not something me just putting out there as a conspiracy theory. So go read it. You'll see that it's very plausible that we were perpetrating deception back then for a couple of different reasons.
Well, that's one of the things that's important, when we have this split between people that are familiar with UFO narratives and they've read Valet and they've read Keel and they know all the stories, but they don't know anything about the intelligence community. And then we have these people, I mean, they're historians, as you're well aware, James, Erica knows, they're historians that their life's work is certain aspects, a certain CIA office or a certain era, the coup in Guatemala, things like that, that's their area of expertise. And it's not a couple of demographics that overlap a lot. And when the UFO people don't know anything about what state-sponsored coups look like and what disinformation campaigns look like, it really can cause a potential lack of understanding. And another thing I cite your work a lot for, when I'm talking with Erica and on her show, is these guys are really good at what they do. And so when people say, well, what's the point? Why just lead the public to think there's UFOs if there's not? Well, that's not the objective. The objective was not to make Jack Brewer misunderstand UFOs. That's just kind of collateral damage. But these guys are like the best in the world in these different nations at what they do. And so if they put their resources and efforts into targeting a demographic, a government, a person that they are going to, as James said, stop their progression of actions or motivate a progression of actions, it's really hard to figure out what that is when they put all their resources in disguising it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and this is where it probably overlaps with QAnon, Erica, because think about what the Russians did in 2016 with their troll farms,
right?
And putting out all of that disinformation and misinformation, not because they wanted Americans to believe all these conspiracies. It was to get them to vote for a certain person. That was their ultimate goal. It was to polarize Americans, get them to demonize the other side, and make your candidate more attractive to them than the other candidate. That's what information warfare is. It's to influence the minds of folks. And maybe the underlying subject matter is nonsense, but there is a purpose to it. When you talk about UFOs too, in the context of deception, I get a lot of this, right? Folks who tell me, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the U.S. go to that level of deception to have people think about or believe in UFOs? Or why would they plant all these UFO stories or create all these myths like Dulce, New Mexico or Skinwalker Ranch?
Mm-hmm.
Why would they do that? It makes no sense. Well, it does make sense because they're not doing it for your benefit. They're doing it for the benefit of the Russians and for the Chinese, who know that that's not the purpose of those stories. There's another reason for those stories, right? Maybe they're trying to hide something. So, and that attracts the interest of these foreign adversaries. Why is the U.S. putting out all of this information about S4 and Area 51 and UFOs and underground bases in Dulce, New Mexico, and underwater bases off the coast of California? The Chinese and the Russians don't look at that and say, "Oh, wow, there's something cool there related to UFOs and aliens." They're thinking, no, those intelligence operatives are hiding something. What are they hiding? Let me go look into it. For the same reason, in 1947, when all these newspaper articles popped up, about flying saucers, the Russians didn't look at that and go, "Oh my God, an alien craft crashed in Roswell, New Mexico." They were looking at it going, "Oh wow, the American public is reporting something. This may be a real breakthrough in aerial technology that the Americans have that we don't have. We better look into it." Right? So you're influencing your enemy. And a lot of times, or I should say sometimes, what deception does is there's a type of deception called ambiguity increasing deception. And what it is you're putting out a narrative that is ambiguous, and it becomes more ambiguous. And so because it's always ambiguous and there's no real way that people can piece things together, it's really to influence your enemy into thinking, I got to look into this deeper because I don't understand the nonsense that's going on here, right? The nonsense and the noise is there for a reason. I just don't know what it is. That's what an ambiguity increasing deception is.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, it is very interesting. And why do you think, though? I mean, America seems to be, I mean, we're the ones that seem to promote UFO stories more than any other country on the planet. And we've done that historically. Why do you think America, the United States, has been the leader in promoting UFO stories?
I think because, as Jack said earlier, it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose for the intelligence community. Okay. And, like I said, like we were just discussing, it could be because it's training grounds for their operatives. It could be because it's a new way to manipulate information. When we were talking about those message boards earlier, I started thinking back to a blog article I wrote way back when I started seeing the what looked like operatives on the boards pushing information and misinformation and disinformation. And I started to think about that. And it scared the hell out of me. And what scared me was that, wait a minute, here's a way you can influence an entire population. You don't have to go hire people to go demonstrate in some foreign country and to get people to believe a certain thing. You just got to put out words on this great medium called the internet. And people are going to accept it. They're going to believe it. And you can just keep pushing that. The Russians learned it. That's why they built those troll farms. That's information warfare is very much alive today. And we see that. And it's especially problematic today because we are overwhelmed with information, right? We cannot focus because things are, we're getting so much information coming at us all the time. It's why our current government gets away with all the things they get away with right now, because they know that the news story maybe is there for a day or so before some new outrage is going to create a new news story. All they have to do is keep that outrage going, right? And keep the information and something new flowing, and keep people from focusing too much on what they're doing. It's information warfare.
And I mean, this is so unreal to see what's taking place. And it is interesting, like with the anti-vax movement and some of these other movements that have been kind of started, the New Age movement, all these areas have been co-opted. I mean, for decades, and it's like you're promoting things and then you're taking people down a route where you're saying science isn't good. Don't get that measles vax, and then you wipe out a whole swath of people. I mean, it's absolutely insane, and it's just the way it's taken hold in this country is off the radar.
It's insane, and it's also disheartening. It's disheartening to see the level of ignorance out there. The numbers of people out there who lack critical thinking skills. Right. And I think we have ourselves to blame for that. And I should say ourselves, I should say our society. And we can even blame, for example, like the cable companies. right? Turn to the Travel Channel. Where do they talk about travel on the Travel Channel? No, it's nonstop paranormal activity, ghost stories, Bigfoot, monster sightings. And all of these shows are just pushing myth and made it look to be real. And you always get to the end of those shows and go, well, where was the proof? What did they prove during the show? They proved nothing. All they did was they got your endorphins flowing and they got you excited about it. And maybe you're a believer in that, so that's just awesome for you. But it really didn't. At the end of the day, it's not pushing truth. And if you were a critical thinker, you would look at that and go, well, that accomplished nothing. Nothing was accomplished by that show, right? Especially all these paranormal shows that push a narrative that never really show proof. And so we're stuck in this cycle of, feeding people these narratives that basically keep them keep them entertained. They're entertained, but it does nothing to educate them or to get them to think critically.
Speaking of paranormal TV shows, towards the end of 2025, some of the cast members of Secret of Skinwalker Ranch got on Facebook and alerted their followings that a property bordering Skinwalker Ranch that was owned by Hicken Farms, LLC, had applied for a special use permit with the county to construct an oil well. And they were calling on the cast members were calling on their followings to submit comment to the county in opposition to this, because according to these cast members and Brandon Fugel, who submitted a letter to the county, this would greatly hinder their supposed scientific work and cause light pollution and vibrations, and they were purportedly extremely concerned about the Mesa. And, there's all these narrative people that are into the inside baseball know there's all these narratives about you can't dig there and all this kind of stuff, that these curses that will befall you if you try to do anything like dig an oil well.
Did they put that in the paper in their argument that it was going to cause a curse to be released upon the greater population there?
Pretty much.
And interestingly, the county development office, when they approved the farm's permit, pointed out that the vast majority of comments that were submitted were from people not in the area, that they were just people that watched the television show, and that no evidence was submitted that any of the things that the Skinwalker people were claiming would be disrupted actually would. So I found that kind of interesting, that the same arguments they make about their paranormal claims, they again did not systematically show, here's the well they're wanting to do, here's what other people have reported happens, here's why we don't want it. They did not present a systematic argument about potential environmental problems or anything like that. And it's another point I think is interesting, is when it comes to real world economic development, those shows like you mentioned, James, and Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, oil men and the companies they run are not the least bit influenced by any alleged Havana Syndrome. Or I don't know if they even know the stories, but they're get us the permit and we'll worry about it when we need to worry about it. But yeah, at least the permit was approved. I know that much.
Well, that'll ruin their TV shots.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, most people in that area don't buy that, and they're kind of annoyed that their life has been disturbed by helicopters flying over their properties at 2 in the morning and frightening their cattle and all sorts of things. But that, yeah, it's interesting. And I want to go back to James when you were there and you met Junior Hicks. And tell us a little bit for people that haven't heard our shows, and make sure you go back and listen to my interviews with James, but talk a little bit about when you first went out there and what happened with your meeting.
Yeah, so I was out there to investigate the ranch because, you know, I read Hunt for the Skinwalker like everybody else did. And yeah, it was like reading a horror novel, right? And so you read this and you're like, is this true? Is there really substance to this? Well, let me go find out. So I went out there and met up with, oh gosh, Dr. Frank, and I'm forgetting his last name. Salisbury, yes, thank you. Dr. Frank Salisbury, before he passed away a few years after that, because he wrote a book called the Utah UFO Display, which is about the Uinta Basin where the Skinwalker Ranch is at. And he wrote this book was about UFO sightings, I think, back in the 70s. And he wanted to basically put out a new edition of the book. So he wanted to, you know, interview people in the area again to add to his book, and even wanted to get on the ranch to talk about the ranch. Well, Bigelow, who owned the ranch at the time, denied Dr. Salisbury access and denied me access, even though now it's a TV show where everybody has access essentially. But I went out there anyway. And so we interviewed people around the ranch. But one of the most interesting things that came out of that, though, was Junior Hicks. So Junior Hicks worked on the ranch, and he was a UFO investigator. And he sat down with Dr. Frank Salisbury and I, and we were talking about the history of the ranch. And, you know, Junior told us, well, hey, you know, there's the former owners of the ranch claim that there was no activity on the ranch. And so what Dr. Frank Salisbury did is he was able to find the brother of the former owners and track him down. And he said, yeah, when my sister and brother-in-law owned that ranch, there was no UFO activity. There was nothing paranormal. None of that happened. All that happened when it was purchased by the next owners and then Bigelow. So you can see that this mythology that Frank, that Frugal pushes in Hunt for this, or in the Skinwalker series, about there's been this long history of activity on the ranch is bunk. Simply not true. It is completely false. And here's the interesting thing about it. After the brother of the former owners told us this, Bigelow called him up. Bigelow called this guy up and said, hey, why are you pushing this story about there was no activity when your sister owned the ranch? Why is a billionaire taking time out of his day to make a call to somebody in Utah to try to convince them of something that that person says is not true? You got to think about that. What does that tell you? That to me reeks of deception. That reeks of manipulation. It reeks of influence. But was any of that information ever released before Congress? Why is George Knapp sitting in front of Congress giving testimony? Right? Why is Jay Stratton, right? Why is this Age of Disclosure film, you know, basically push the entire narrative that started with Skinwalker? And so this is why they're so afraid of us pushing back about the narrative about the ranch, because they're banking on the public never hearing that and just believing what they're saying, which is, yeah, there's a long history of paranormal activity on the ranch. No, there's not. So you know, it's myth. It's a mythology.
And you know, you mentioned Garth Myers, and interestingly enough, I grew up in the LDS church, and he was my bishop, and it was very interesting. He was such a kind, wonderful human being, the kind of person. He was a very respected physician here in Salt Lake City, and he never in a million years would have lied about anything that was just not in his character. And so I talked to his daughter, whom I knew, you know, in the ward. And I just said, can you tell me what your dad thought about what was going on the ranch? And it was just very simply, there was never anything ever, for decades. Nothing was paranormal in the ranch. The stories were bunk. And she told me at that time that they owned the mineral rights underneath the ranch. So you've got this no digging. Well, there you have that. And so it was very interesting to also see then when I had brought that up in public, or you could see Brandon was getting pushed on the narrative that he was very much, Garth is a liar, and
Oh,
all of
yeah.
these things. And it was just like, this is an upstanding member in my community,
Dr.
who
Frank
is not even
Salisbury.
here anymore. And
Dr. Frank Salisbury is a liar. Garth Myers is a liar. Junior Hicks is a liar. Believe me, but don't believe them. Right? Come
right.
on. And then when you confront them, like Jack says, super defensiveness, right? Let's block you on Twitter because we don't want you pushing back on this narrative. Folks, the truth is the truth. And if you're trying to push a narrative that's not the truth, I'm sorry, you are pushing mythology. And somehow, well, they did well because they got all the way up to the halls of Congress with it.
Which is just so fascinating to me, because when you step back, like you mentioned, and you look logically, okay, why, this top secret place, and you've got a fence that is, waist high to me that I could step over. And, there's why is this not secure? Why aren't they letting other scientists come onto the property? Why did the Skinwalker myth start? And what did that even have to do with that area? Absolutely nothing. And so, although George Knapp, created a story that has endured for almost 4 decades now, it's just, and people believe it because they don't want to go past what they're being told. And if you look into the history, if you look into what would actually happen, what the ramifications would be if you had a burial ground on the property, well, there are protocols, there are laws in place, all of these things. And if you just spend some time at the library, you do research into what was taking place on that land and all of these things, that just none of it holds up. And as you mentioned, with our society here, we get told these stories, but yet none of us want to look any deeper and find out that, well, wait a minute, there actually is something really rational there that dispels this, idea that has been perpetuated and has led
Sure.
to people believing things that aren't necessarily in their best interests.
Exactly true. If those stories, though, happen to coincide with your beliefs, you're never going to look deeper, right? If you watch a UFO show and you're a UFO believer, then hey, that's great. That's enough proof for you, right? Just the fact they're on TV talking about it. Same thing if you believe in Bigfoot, right? You watch a Bigfoot show, you're never going to look deeper at the claims. So you have that aspect of it where coinciding with your beliefs means you're just going to scratch the surface. On the other side, you have the skeptics and the debunkers who look at it and go, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. But they also just scratch the surface.
Right.
Right. They don't dig deep. You have to dig deep. You have to look at the raw information. It's what I tell people all the time about my research. Don't believe me. Right. Don't ever believe a word coming out of my mouth. Read my book and research for yourself. Look at the source material, the source documents that came out of the National Archives. I'm not inventing this out of thin air. Right. I'm proposing a theory, but it's a theory based on real evidence. And if you want to pursue that further, great. Go to the National Archives. Get out of your armchair. Do some work. But today it seems even more than ever, folks simply want to ask AI, or they want to ask the internet, or they want to watch a TV show, or they want to get on a message board. Nobody wants to do the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And the hard work and asking the hard questions and looking at the raw data. You have to look at the raw data.
And one of the things, sorry, Jack, I know you've got something that you want to say, but I just want to, right now, when we're looking at the fact that NASA is going to be destroying all of their books, they're going to be destroying all of this stuff. And you've got the fact that the current administration is, what is going to happen with the National Archives? What is going to happen with some of these historical records? And that is truly terrifying, because then history can be rewritten. And that's very problematic.
It is. I mean, and when we see, the current administration destroying not just books, but basically history, right? Entire histories, whether that's the history of African Americans or the history of the American Indian. It's just across the board, they are erasing history or attempting to erase history.
These are good points. As far as Fugel's claims about years and years of reports of paranormal activity, I tried to run that down specifically. He had claimed that there were law enforcement reports, and the sheriff's office didn't have them, and neither did the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So I contacted him directly and asked for them, and he handed me off to a staff member who ultimately neither one of them could produce these reports that he had claimed was in hand. And they deferred to, they had oral testimony of a former law enforcement officer and got defensive. Both of them did. That I was saying, but you said, so you don't have what you, and like we mentioned the red flag earlier, wanted to kind of turn it into I was being hostile for wanting them to produce what they claimed they had. And along those same lines, and you mentioned changing Native American history, James. Erica, you've spoken with Native American history experts at the University of Utah about the supposed Skinwalker narrative, right?
Yeah, Dr. Floyd O'Neill was an historian and one of the foremost historians on indigenous peoples, and he went all over the country and documented, took down, wrote all the oral histories, and which was, nobody had really done that to that extent. You can go to the Marriott Special Archives to see all of the work that he did, and he grew up in that area in the Uinta Basin. And so when I approached him and kind of told him, okay, these are this is what I've got here, and he was just like, wow. And he went through graciously, went through his vast, library, and he pulled out 2 books that referenced skinwalkers. And it was 2 paragraphs. It was very interesting. And he just said, none of that adds up. And that wouldn't have even been in that area. And we never heard anything about that sort of thing. And so he was a bit perplexed by that. And I was so grateful that he was kind to me to humor me enough to talk about that. But it is, again, it's just like the white man rewriting history. And just that's been kind of amazing to me to see. And it's really sad, actually.
Why isn't the Skinwalker TV crew in that person's office asking him those questions?
Right.
Because it counters the narrative they're trying to push, the entertainment they're trying to push on TV. And I was going to talk about I forget the name of the coined term for this, but it's basically that when you put out information that's misinformation or disinformation, the amount of energy that's required to debunk that is great. So, which means that if you keep putting out information, a nonstop stream of information, disinformation, the truth seekers, right, cannot keep up. They simply cannot keep up with it. The same way that the media can't keep up with all of the lies and outrages and scandals of the current administration. They just can't keep up with it. So that means that information flows unfiltered because no one's countering it, because it takes a lot of energy to counter it. It takes a lot of investigation. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes you going down to talk to people, right? Or walking into an archive and looking at raw documentation. And for a lot of folks today, that's just too much effort. And unfortunately, that means that the truth never gets told.
And I think also, too, it's like there's a lot of money behind these groups. They have a lot of means to to go on the internet and hire hosts, that are putting out all of that disinformation and misinformation, and they troll people that try to put out the truth. I mean, there are a lot of strikes against you when you are somebody that is vested in putting out accurate information. And so at least that's been, I think, James, you can agree. Jack, I think you can. I know I definitely can, with trying to put forward things that I've found out over the years. It hasn't been an easy road, for sure.
No, it hasn't. And you were talking about when Bigelow bought the MUFON archives. I don't know if you remember, there was an organization, I think it was called the Open Minds Organization, that they put out a magazine, and they were sponsoring UFO conferences, and there was a lot of money behind it. This was back, right after I left MUFON. And I always thought, who's behind that? Who's putting all that money into this subject? And for what purpose? It seems like they were trying to hijack the narrative in the same way that, the current disclosure folks have hijacked the narrative. And this is something I don't know if anybody's talking about, but don't you think that, an organization like MUFON has no reason to exist anymore? What is its purpose? The entire UFO subject has been hijacked away from them.
Right.
Now you have an official organization. You have Aero that's investigating UFOs. You have NASA that's conducting UFO investigation. You have the military that's, acknowledging that UFOs are real. It's completely hijacked and taken away from them. And, for what reason other than information control?
Right. Yeah, and could potentially be some other things. So I've got to ask you, because I know that there are questions here that I have not been asking, guys. So thank you for your patience in chat. But what do you think about the discombobulator, the that was allegedly used in Venezuela? Is there truth to that?
I got such a good laugh out of that. The discombobulator. Yeah. I don't know what this alleged weapon is, or if it's real, or, it's kind of, to me, it seems like what's behind Havana Syndrome. Is there a real weapon there? Is that a real phenomena? I mean, I don't know. It seems like, who is the guy, the scientist who's been analyzing brain scans for that?
Kit Green.
No, not Kit Green. The other guy.
Gary Nolan.
What's his name?
Gary Nolan.
Oh, yes, Mr. Gary Nolan, who blocked me on Twitter, even though I've never actually, sent a message. Yeah.
He epitomizes getting defensive. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Why else would you block somebody even before they've even had a conversation with you? So yeah, you have to look at that and say, wait, here's Nolan. He's involved in that with Havana Syndrome. Why is that? This is the same guy that showing up on UFO videos and I think he was on Age of Disclosure, was he not? Wasn't he interviewed in Age of Disclosure?
I think so.
Or am I mistaken? So, is there a weapon behind that? It could be. So I don't know if this discombobulator is like an energy weapon, like what caused Havana Syndrome, or it's something else. I mean, I wouldn't put it past that we have really cool stuff in our arsenal. I just think we don't call it the discombobulator. Let's have a more official term than that.
And I mean, I just go back to, you talking a little bit earlier about how we used UFOs to hide what we were actually doing in our own technology. So maybe there is, a chance that we do have weapons, like that.
Absolutely. Look what happened with the raid on bin Laden. We used some very high-tech helicopters that didn't make much noise, right? That nobody ever knew about. Very high tech. In fact, when it crash landed in the courtyard where they shot bin Laden, they had to destroy it because it was such high tech. I mean, this is stuff that, you have to think about it. Think about the stealth fighters are from the 80s, right? We have some really cool stuff in our arsenal that nobody has ever seen, which I think is good because it keeps us safe, but at the same time, it's what intelligence operatives do. If they don't want you to be paying attention to something you should be paying attention to, well, they're going to put out misinformation and disinformation to distract you. And I think that's what the whole Bob Lazar story was. It was really to hide what was happening at Area 51, which has nothing to do with reverse engineering craft or, keeping aliens alive that we captured from somewhere. It was about covering up for these stealth projects that we were doing there, or any other high, tech weaponry we're doing there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you could debunk all of that, but then I've got to ask myself, maybe there is something to that potentially. I don't know.
To what part?
To the fact that we're using, weapons, directed energy weapons, or we're doing things. I don't know. Jack, what do you think? Like with
Well,
Havana Syndrome.
there are national security beat reporters that have written on directed energy weapons, and they were called non-lethal weapons for a long time. That was, interestingly enough, Colonel John Alexander's area of expertise. There's a lot of research that has been done, and the technology exists. I'm sure the weapons are seen as advantageous in hostage situations, possibly any number of circumstances. The question becomes the sophistication and the actual device. Like is it something that is broadcast from the bottom of a plane, or from a U-Haul trailer sized thing that has to be dragged by a Humvee through a street? Or is there something that, like some kind of futuristic ray gun you can pull out of your pocket and aim at somebody and shoot? The devil's in the details. But yeah, there is ongoing research into directed energy weapons, and people interested in that can find some good, reliable writers on it as well, that, as we've been talking about, show their work and where they got their information. They don't just say Kit Green told them so.
Yeah. Well, we saw that, even today on the streets of Minneapolis.
Right.
They're using sonic weapons against protesters. What they call, was it the voice of God is what they call it. So yeah, we know that there are energy weapons, and those are the ones we know about. I'm sure there are much more sophisticated weapons that we simply don't know about. Yeah. So make sure you go out and get an MRI scan. So just in case you get hit by one of these weapons, you have a baseline reference to compare.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Maybe that's what Trump was doing. We don't know.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
So, Jack, I know that you had a lot of questions with regard to like your Cold War, all of your research, and you've been very awesome to let me go off on these tangents, Jack. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Erica. I appreciate you. I always appreciate you facilitating these discussions. I appreciate James's work. I think that it's wonderful for someone to show us how to be interested in a topic, collect information, organize it, give the footnotes, post it online, connect it from your footnotes. I just really appreciate how you've gone about that, James. And there are aspects of it that I think we'll continue to dig into for years, of the things that you've brought up in your work.
Yeah, it would be nice if somebody just walked up to the mic tomorrow at the White House and said, yeah, this is what happened during the Cold War. This is what we did. We perpetrated deception back in 1947. We kept it going through the 50s into the 60s because it had national security implications for us. That would be a way of confirming the research. The unfortunate thing is that when somebody reads my book, and I've been told this more than once, someone looks at it and goes, that's just another conspiracy. You're just promulgating another conspiracy. And in a way, they're not wrong, because I have no way to prove that happened. It's just a theory. It's kind of like all the folks who wrote books about the Kennedy assassination. Some of them dug very deep, got very good documentation. They came up with great theories. But at the end of the day, they haven't been able to prove it, right? Then it just becomes another conspiracy. So that's the unfortunate, when you don't have the ability to confirm your research, because what's needed to confirm your research is classified and may never see the light of day. Then you're just basically, along with all the other conspiracy theorists, the only difference being that you can at least point to footnotes and, raw data that you've extracted from archives, but the theory itself remains to be proven. And I'm just hoping that, before I die, there is some confirmation.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. Along those lines, back when I was writing Wayward Sons, which basically delves into all the intelligence officers associated with the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, they were very similar to what happened with To the Stars in the last 8 years, in that they were successful in instigating congressional hearings on UFOs and getting a lot of public interest in it. And one of the things that I wrote about in that book was a man named Nicholas de Roquefort, who, again, when we have this separation of UFO community and historians in the intelligence community, de Roquefort was well known as a potential CIA asset, and some reporters sued to try to get his records from the CIA and were always unsuccessful. And he also went on to be a organizer of NICAP. So that's one of those things that kind of, like, to me, is an insult to intelligence, that I think this man wasn't acting in an official capacity. And I bring this up because when I was writing, I did FOIA requests, and the FBI gave me what was some really interesting material. And I've been trying ever since to get it further declassified. One of the reasons it's really interesting to me is it hits right on the timeline that he was involved with NICAP. And during that series of FOIA requests, the FBI told me about a file number that was in the possession of the National Archives. So I requested it, and they have finally now, like, what's it been, 4 or 5 years later, they have notified me they've completed line by line processing of some 200 pages approximately, and we're waiting to get notified of its electronic transmission or release. So basically what I'm saying here is a very interesting NICAP figure. We're expecting to get several dozen pages, hopefully, more FBI records on him, about what his career was. And I can't promise there'll be any references to NICAP, but I think it should certainly give us another puzzle piece or two.
Yeah, you've done great work with your research into NICAP, and I've very much enjoyed reading your books because we're kindred spirits, right? We believe in finding the raw information and documenting our research, and not just making assertions without proof, right? So you did a great job in that book. And it actually reminded me of something of a FOIA request I sent to the FBI. Anybody who's researched 1947 UFO cases finds that the FBI released a lot of documentation from that period. Everything from the Maury Island incident to the alleged crashed UFO in Shreveport, Louisiana. And the interesting thing about those FBI reports is they always put a subject matter on it, right? And they use these initial letters for their subject matter. So it would say like something like subject matter R, because it had to do with the Russians, or subject matter, I don't know, something else that had to do with subversion. Well, for anything that was UFO related, it was always subject matter X. And that's probably where the X-Files came from, or I think, the show, the X came from. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to send a FOIA request to the FBI, and I'm going to ask them for the manuals that they would have given to an FBI agent back then for how to write up their documentation, and when they would have to choose subject matter R, and when they would have to choose subject matter X or any other subject matter. And they first denied it, so I appealed it, and then they denied it again. Because something like that, so simple, could give you a clue into what is really going on in the FBI. But if they don't want you to know what that was, then they're going to deny it. So I feel like FOIA is a great tool, but I feel like it's being piecemealed out to us because, it's being controlled.
Wow, that's really interesting because, yeah, I'll see subject, Truman Bethram, and then there'll be like 2 letters dash and another letter. And sometimes I'll look that up and I'll be like, what does that mean? And you can figure out, well, here's security investigation, but what's this 3rd letter? And you got a really good point there that if they're not going to redact the code, well, then the manual should be available for release. Like if the code isn't redacted, then how can you redact the manual,
Yeah, that it would be extremely interesting if I could get a copy of that manual to say, because it basically is teaching FBI agents, when you see this subject, you're going to put this letter on there. So I'd really be really curious to what it would say about the UFO subject.
Oh, that's cool.
Back in the 1940s.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. And so I just have to ask again, I'm getting questions in here and I want to make sure that I'm not getting to them. So question for the guest, could Foo Fighters have been disinformation?
Absolutely. Crews were reporting this during World War II. So the question is, what were they seeing? For one thing, or was this selective release? Were they reporting things because they were told to report it? We don't know. It could have been part of some deception operation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
We've seen too that once things are reported, other people report them. Like you don't need 50 people to claim they saw something to end up with 50 people claiming they saw it. You need 5 or 10, and then 40 more will follow suit.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly like Skinwalker.
Absolutely. Or think about it this way. I remember my father used to live in Puerto Rico before he passed away. And I went to visit him one year. It just happened to be the year where the chupacabra craze started, right? It was started in Puerto Rico. And so that made its rounds through the island. And all of a sudden, everybody was seeing chupacabras. But then it sort of went viral from there to all the other Latin countries. Why didn't it go to Canada? Why did it stay within the Latin community? It's just things like that that are interesting, where when something goes viral, it becomes, all of a sudden everybody else starts to see the same things or report the same things.
Right. And then that's what, like when I look at Skinwalker Ranch, I've got to go back to that. It's like that. And they talk about the hitchhiker effect. To me, the hitchhiker effect that they're referring to is just that, seeding an idea and watching the way it spreads for the detriment of mankind, to put it in, I'm one way. I think that's what the whole thing is. You get I've taken reports for a long time. I did in the Uinta Basin, and to see that, you put 1 or 2 ideas there and then you prime somebody and you get them in a situation. And of course, they're going to look at a plane and think that a plane is something unusual because they're not usually out in the middle of the night, or they don't have, they don't understand that there's an oil refinery in the distance, or they're not used to the surroundings. And so you can make up a whole lot of things when those ideas are seeded, which is really unfortunate that here in the United States, like we've talked about through this interview, we're not teaching people critical thinking skills like they do in other countries to specifically combat disinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that every UFO reported is some deception or somebody trying to gain notoriety. There are a lot of UFO reports out there that are simply honest people reporting something they
Right.
saw they don't understand. The same thing with the abduction phenomenon. A lot of folks reporting things that they're experiencing that they don't understand. So those things should be investigated. I agree. The problem is when you have somebody who's a hoaxer or a perpetuator, they're just muddying the waters, and they really cause a disservice to the entire subject, because those things that are worthy of investigation because they're reported by honest people gets all of a sudden muddied along with everything else, where folks are like, well, if that's a hoax, maybe that's a hoax. It's hard to separate, right, what's real and what's not.
And you bring up a really good point, because as being the executive director of MUFON, you talk to people that were very genuine, as I have. I've had experiences that I still can't explain, that were interesting, that I will continue to look for a rational explanation to. And people, 95% of the people are very genuine in what they've seen. And I really feel that people should be given information to promote, like, hey, you're curious about this. You think that you saw something. Well, okay, let's look at A, B, C, and D and educate yourself on all of these things, and build up your own, kind of a reference guide, so you can put yourself through those critical thinking steps and kind of empower somebody that thinks that they've seen something. And I get kind of caught in the habit, especially lately, because I feel so, I've seen so many things in this topic that I tend to, maybe discourage people more than I should. And I need to be encouraging of people that are asking questions from a really sincere place. And
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. You're absolutely right. I've interviewed folks who claim to be abducted, and I walked away feeling in awe at their stories, because I saw no reason for them to lie.
right,
They weren't looking for notoriety. They really were actually very hesitant to report it. I even have a family member who had a UFO that followed them home one day. When you hear stories like that, you have to think, well, there's something here. I don't know what it is, and I would like to find out what it is, but it's very difficult to find out when the waters are so muddied by all of the other junk that gets thrown along with it. So it really is. You're right. We shouldn't discourage people from reporting what they honestly think they saw.
we just have to figure out, where the good places are, and to make sure that people know that if you're looking for, in my opinion, community, and you want to share your stories, you just have to be so careful about doing that in a social media group, or falling prey to some of the people in the UFO circuit who are either grifting or have something nefarious in mind. And I just think, write your experiences down, go to a library, learn about astronomy, learn about, visual acuity, learn about all these different things, and then do your own exploratory, have that process where you're keeping things kind of close to the vest, and you're figuring things out that mean something to you, instead of looking to a community that is potentially, that is pretty tainted and that could
Right.
lead to more injury, than good.
And having the intelligence community involved and
Right.
having an interest does not help at all.
No.
And Jack, maybe you can tell me, I guess it's more of a question for you. Do you think the intelligence community has the same level of interest, like in Bigfoot research, that they have in UFO research?
They do not. They do not. In fact, there's a story I tell sometimes about, on a trip up to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I attended the Ozark Mountain UFO conference, and it was well represented by intelligence officials, and as well as charlatans. And when I left, I went over to the Crescent Moon Hotel, that is like billed as America's most haunted hotel. And it was like a peaceful out in the country experience as
Right.
compared to the UFO conference. No, the halls were not lined with spooks at the nation's most haunted hotel. No.
I think maybe I've told you the story before, but when I was living in Colorado and I became MUFON director, I brought all of the archives to my home. That's where the archives were, the MUFON files. And I was organizing them, to sort of, try to classify them because we're getting them ready for scanning as part of the Pandora project. And I hired this guy to come in and clean the windows of my house. And he was inside doing the inside cleaning, and he saw these UFO files. He's like, "Is that all about UFOs?" I'm like, "Yeah." I told him about MUFON, and I was the MUFON director. He's like, "Hey, I'm with the big research organization, the BFRO." And so I commented to him and said, "Well, that a lot of times when people see UFOs, they also report Bigfoot at the same time." And he looked at me and says, "That's crazy." I'm like, "Wait a minute, you're calling me crazy? You believe in Bigfoot, and you're calling me crazy because thinking if there's some relationship with UFOs?" That just cracked me up.
That is awesome. So there's another question for you before we wrap it up tonight. But you had mentioned, Steve is just saying that you'd mentioned that you were going to be working on a YouTube presentation on your research, flying saucers and operating. I'm sorry, I can't see that far away, but anyway, without the caps. But are there any developments on doing your YouTube project?
Yeah, I would like, actually to start up a podcast, and actually a thought for, I'd like to call it just the circle jerk, because and just talk about what we're talking about right now. How there's such a lack of skepticism in this field, and how people are getting away with pushing lies and narratives that they shouldn't be getting away with. Right? Someone should be calling them to the carpet and saying, "Hey, prove what you're saying," and just bringing more attention to the skeptical side of the house. And why, I think what really hit me hard was when I was watching the Bill Maher show, and he had Dan Farah, I guess that's the guy. Yeah, he had him on because he was promoting the age of disclosure.
Right.
And I was taken back by Bill Maher saying, "Oh, really? That's real now?" I always thought that was just the tinfoil crowd. And to see him drop his skepticism over that because of this big media push behind this,
right,
just really struck me. I'm like, "Well, Bill, if you only know what I know, right? I could tell you, I'll take you back to Skinwalker Ranch and we'll talk about where this all originated." But there's such a lack of that information right now on the internet.
And it is amazing to see, you mentioned the age of disclosure, and just knowing and seeing the social media machine that was behind pushing that and that narrative. It's probably one guy over here. Well, actually, I've kind of been looking into that, which is fascinating. But, just seeing that, and the film got really horrible reviews because people that were asking critical questions were saying, "Okay, but you're talking about all these whistleblowers. Nobody has, show us their credentials. Like, you're giving information that has been put forward, like you mentioned so many times, that nothing has been corroborated over decades." And so it's just another person myth making and promoting the same old ball of wax in a different way that really wasn't necessarily that great, in my opinion. But
yeah, and circle jerking the narrative. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But
I like it.
But the thing about that, Erica, is that unfortunately, what made the front page or what made the news was the narrative of the age of disclosure, not the skepticism or the critical reviews of it.
Right.
Right. So they won that war. They won the media war there. It's basically skepticism simply isn't being promulgated enough in the media, because it's entertainment. It's also clickbait for a lot of folks.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting and sad, but here we are in kind of a new, well, not just a really interesting time in history that I kind of wish in a weird way I wasn't really living through. I'm grateful for the opportunity, but living in strange times requires, I guess, a good counselor or something, because this has just been off the hook with some of the stuff that's taking place now. But
Agreed.
I think one of the things that happens too is people, God love them, are generally honest. And so they don't suspect such just, brazen lying and misrepresentation of things as they might see in the UFO community. And it really is a situation, a condition of act like every day is April Fool's when you wade into this stuff. Like you've got to check everything systematically. And I recall one time I was talking to a couple of people that weren't really interested into UFOs, and the topic came up, and one said, well, this Skinwalker Ranch thing, like I've seen the show a couple times. What do you think about it? And so, you're like, well, let's ease into this. Like, don't just, open fire with both barrels. And so I say, well, my experience is they're unreliable narrators at best. And they said, but the legends, like, don't the legends go back generation?
Yeah.
And I told them, actually, nah, my talk to expert in Native American affairs, nah, they don't. And their mouth just dropped. Like they were just shocked that like they're just like openly just saying that it would appear so. Yes, it would. And see, most people just, like I say, God love them, are generally honest enough that they're not suspecting that they're being so openly misled.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at, what's taking place not only in the UFO culture, which has been, I mean, that's a great testing ground. And you can see the way good people have been, kind of prompted to believe in things that weren't in their best interest. And then you look in a larger scale at what's taking place, not only here, but all over the globe, unfortunately. And good people are believing people who've been on TV or people who claim that they, are there, that are in the military, people that claim that they're doctors or different things. And as a result, we've just seen pretty much really the deterioration of kind of our country as we know it, in my opinion, thanks to just not using critical thinking skills. So,
yeah, the UFO subject itself has become the biggest echo chamber that's out there, bigger than any political party, because it's a single narrative, right? It's become a single narrative where the voices that are oppose it or are skeptical, they're simply not being heard. It's why does this channel not have millions of subscribers? It should. It absolutely should, right? Why is Jeremy Corbell getting away with the stuff he gets away with, and George Knapp and Brandon Fugel, right? They are in that echo chamber that is just it's basically a monopoly, I should say. There's not a competing echo chamber out there for the opposite voice. It's unfortunate.
it is, but hopefully we'll start with, maybe we're learning things. Maybe now that the truth is being exposed on multiple levels, we'll start looking to people that have a voice of reason, and we can step back and pull ourselves off the brink of, I don't know, whatever we're leading into. Jack, what are your closing thoughts for the evening?
I want to thank James again for joining us, and thank you for your kind comments about my work and about Erica's work in this channel. And it's always a pleasure to spend some time chatting with you. Thank you. And again, Erica, thank you for facilitating.
Yeah,
It was my pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, James. I thought it's just always fascinating talking to you, and I really appreciate just your straightforwardness. I appreciate the work that you've done, and you've been through a lot in this subject, and you've always wanted to find the truth, and you've been very a good role model for me. So I appreciate your work, and
Thank you.
all of you. So thank you, James, and thanks, Jack, for everything that you do. Please make sure all of you go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Make sure you click like and subscribe to the channel, because I'm the worst at actually doing my own promoting for the channel. And then follow us, give us a like, and then if you want to go to our show notes, you can find out where you can follow James, which would be historydeceived.blogspot.com. And then your book, is there a place that you would recommend getting it where you...
They can download it from the blog.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. Take care, and I hope that everybody stays safe. And I want to just thank everybody in chat again. I love people that come to this chat room, because everybody's asking really, really good questions, and we're supportive. And over the years, it's been very meaningful to me to have a supportive community that questions the narrative, that makes mistakes, that we're humble enough to say, okay, wait a minute, we need to step back and then find out what the truth really is. It's important now more than ever. So to all of you, thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch you next time. Ciao.